Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on the topic of assessment in secondary education, theory and practice of assessment, feedback and mediation. Can we just check in the chat that okay, great. We are all here and we can hear each other, which is great news. Thank you everyone for sharing this evening today with us. I know you're very tired and all looking forward to holidays, but also today's topic is a buzzword of this month, and assessment is extremely important. And I hope that some of the tips and findings today you will be able to apply in your classrooms this year and of course in the months that are ahead of us. So let us start. First, through our formal education, we haven't really received a lot of training on these three important things. And these are the things that we spend, I think, half of our time in schools and classrooms on, and that is assessment, feedback, and mediation. And all of these three very important things answer same questions. So when we think about assessment, where are our students? Where do they want to be? Where do we want them to be? Why are we assessing them? Is it just for progress, or is it a summative assessment? Why are we giving feedback? How are we giving feedback? What is mediation? Where can we practice it? Why and how and whom with? So these are very, very interesting and everyday applicable things that we will deal with today. So first, when we think about assessment, Cambridge Dictionary says it is the process of testing and making judgment about someone's knowledge, ability, and skills. And we know that there are really many stakeholders involved, from the ministry, from the agency, from school, and of course, our students. And we as teachers are here in this whole process, which is very important as well. And we would like to meet everybody's requirements, but it's very important not to forget the original idea of assessment. So the process of teaching and learning has a certain plan, and it's very good that it has a plan, but we don't have to be in love with the plan. So plans can change, as we have seen in the past 2 years, and we're still witnessing it. And assessment is like a GPS for us in this teaching learning process. And this is why we have a map here that you can see with 3 different paths from Školska knjiga, and this red point is where I'm sitting right now. And I imagined my learning objective, or the place where I want to get to be Museum of Broken Relationships, uptown Zagreb, for people who maybe don't know where it is. And there are different ways in which you can get there. So first, on the left, you can, for example, take longer way, do window shopping. And in terms of learning, we can think about, self-study and, studying in detail, taking our times. On the right is more traditional way, which is a way across the main square. And the path in the middle is the one using technology, in this case, Zagreb funicular, though it's very old technology, but it's still working, and it's still the fastest way to the Museum of Broken Relationships. What was my point here? So the learning, the way that we take, or the learning style that we prefer, or our students prefer, can be different according to our needs, preferences, speed or time that we have available, manner in which we like to teach or in which they like to study. So what is important is this journey in between, and GPS is here to show the way, to guide us, to get us back to our way if we get lost somehow and take the wrong turning. But it's important to keep in mind our learning objective. Now, whatever the preferred style is, there are always basic principles and purposes which do not change. They do not change whatever course book you teach, whatever approach you use. So where you are, me in Školska now, that's diagnostic assessment. how far I am from Museum of Broken Relationships, that's summative assessment. And what's in between is distance or progress and instructions how to get there, with, of course, different alternatives, which is formative assessment. And what is most important about assessment is that in assessment, we get information. And this information we should use to make decisions. If we just stop after giving a mark, for example, in summative assessment, there is no change in learning or in our teaching. And what we have is data. And data can be very interesting if you analyze it. If you don't analyze it, then it's not very interesting. Even our summative assessment is formative in a way, because we make certain decisions based on that. But when you think about your everyday practice and all the students that you teach, and especially those of you who work in bigger schools, you really have huge workload, and I'm quite aware of that. If we are honest, we can ask ourselves, have you ever done the step between the assessment, especially summative, and the next unit? Or we enter the marks in the dnevnik and then we just go on, and what happens, happens. And that's something that is, to be honest, probably more likely, because everything else is extremely time consuming and quite difficult to do, to be honest, right? So learner-oriented assessment is something that Cambridge developed as a response to this traditional formative and summative assessment, which were seen as separate and contrasted terms. And learner-oriented assessment takes all levels of assessment and combines data to get better learning. Now, those of you who are users of our series by Cambridge, Think and Empower, you have seen Cambridge LMS, and the point is that it supports and fits the task cycle, so you can streamline feedback quite easily. You can produce progress reports. Why is that possible? Because you have artificial intelligence through unit progress tests, through skills tests, and when your student takes a test, depending on the score in the progress test, in the end, they're directed back to square one. Let's say if they did really bad. If they're in the middle, then they get referred to the practice of the parts that they were not completely successful at. And if they did really well, they get extension activities. So very often we have excellent students and, you know, oh yes, this is an excellent student, and they don't get any extra feedback or activities. In this way, this is covered also. Why is this good? Because we know that we can do our own tests as well, but they do not have to be valid or reliable. They have some other characteristics which are very good, so they're very tailored towards our group of students. But what is important, no matter what kind of assessment we do, is that it has to be integrated into studying so that we avoid mismatch between classroom assessment and learning. And that one, especially in Matura, in any kind of standardized tests. And this is something which is extremely important. During my presentation in Hupe a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned this example, which is from my private life, where in one downtown school in Zagreb, in the end of third year, a young teacher gave listening from Matura in June to the third graders, and she promised not to give marks, but she did give marks based on this, but they've never before that practiced listening. So listening and reading comprehension remain most difficult skills to teach and to learn. And I think this should be avoided. And for people who are not using, for example, kinds of course books that have this available, I will show you just a bit later on where you can find them to provide samples for your students to have experience and practice that is required from the first to the fourth grade, not only just before Matura. Now, in these course books, so you can see Think, you can see examples from Empower, you can see examples from Forward, so all our course book, we tried to include common type questions. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we had Srednja Higher conference, where I heard that we are going to have mock matura in spring. So I think late March or April. Now, I would like your opinion in the chat, if possible, on having mock matura for your students. Are you looking forward to it? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's useless? What are your views on mock tests and particularly mock matura? If you can share some of your ideas with us, I would really appreciate it. So mock matura, yes or no? Do you feel like correcting it? Because I heard that teachers are going to do this for free. I don't support that part. Great idea. Students are looking forward. Thank you. Thank you. That's very good. Are they afraid of mock matura? I was an excellent student. I never liked tests. Teachers are not. I can imagine that. Useful for students? No fuss. Okay. Great. Great. Practice task in class anyway. Great. That, well, of course, that is a bit too late. That was my my view on this. I would prefer it if it were at least, you know, now in December, but okay. Yes, February, that would also be good. The beginning of more official, time consuming. Yes. Okay. Of course, having these exercises is of course great because they get used to format. There are different benefits. They can reflect on answers, understand question types, strategies, how much time they have available. Now, the only use I can see this from this fuss that someone remembered, that they are going to live through this fuss once before the actual matura. So they will experience it in these formal terms perhaps a little bit earlier. So for all of you who want to find maybe more resources, here they are on the link. So you will have this presentation together with all the materials that I have today for you available on the link. So don't worry about links at the moment. Just bear in mind, proper assessment is about raising awareness, fostering knowledge, motivation, and growth mindset. I know it's difficult to achieve. I know that autonomy is difficult to achieve. I'm quite aware of that as a teacher and as a parent of a teenager who is an excellent student. So these are simple words, but very complex tasks for us as teachers. But I still hope that we are going to go through this year, no matter how challenging it is, again, together successfully. So feel free to use these resources. They are available, they're here, great ideas, everything ready for you to use. Now, part of assessment is definitely feedback as a two-way ticket. Now, a two-way ticket, but not a return one, preferably, as I would like to say. Some of the definitions of feedback: powerful influence on learning, information a learner receives about their language learning and production, can be summative or formative, and its aim is to improve, motivate, and again, develop autonomy. Beautiful English language as it is, we give feedback to feed forward, okay? To feed forward future learning and future teaching. Why is it two-way ticket? Because it's a result of interaction between you and your students, or between two students, or student with himself or herself. It's also, as members of this new generation, students are very much expecting very common feedback, to receive it very often. And as it says, information is new gold. I think in learning and in work environment, feedback is also new gold and very popular issue. And this loop between assessment, this feedback is extremely important because it enables us to move ahead, to adjust, to improve, and to learn. Also, it's very important to receive feedback from your student. Now, not everybody likes receiving feedback because sometimes people, even students, and we as teachers think of it as criticizing, but the basis of good feedback and possibility of providing and receiving feedback are good relations between you and your students and among the students, of course. So feedback, we say, needs to be smart. So first, smart means, first S means specific. What is specific? For example, if a student says, I will do more writing practice, then it's not enough. A student needs to decide whether this writing practice is going to be corrected or by a teacher, or perhaps what I strongly suggest is that you direct your students towards application Write and Improve that Cambridge has, where they can, for free, without registration, participate in activities of automated feedback on essay writing. These can be paragraphs, doesn't have to be the whole essay. They have 5 steps in which they can correct and improve their writing, which we will see just a little bit later on. Feedback needs to be measurable. So they have to be able to say, okay, today I've learned 3 things, or I can now really express future in the English language. So I know different kinds or different tenses for expressing future. So it has to be measurable. It has to be achievable. So how much time do I have to have available? How much time can I spend on something? It has to be relevant. This is practice from a mock test that you can direct them to. So in the mock test, we see which areas are perhaps weaker and what they can concentrate on. And of course, studying has to be time-based, which means they have to have some time frame in which they're going to do activities. And for this purpose, I've also enclosed for you my study template. So this is something you can share with your students. I'm aware, again, that not all students will work on this, but I know a lot of students who really have this kind of notes, to-do lists, where they put things they have to do. And once they do them, they cross them out. They feel very proud. They feel very satisfied. And when they still have something to work on, they have to shift it to the next week, for example. And then when they come to the week 3, if there are too many activities, then they become more aware of the things they still have to do. And that will make them, help them organize themselves better as well. Okay, then effective feedback. I hope you're not very hungry. And if you are, you still have enough time for carbonara this evening after our webinar. What is effective feedback? So those of you who have children and children who are able to cook something already, perhaps, will understand this. And those of you can imagine, of course, if you're teaching someone, for example, how to cook or prepare carbonara, then you will tell them, you know, if they just put a spaghetti in water, that they forgot salt, or that their water has to be of certain temperature, and how they are going to stir things in the bowl, and in what size they should cut the chops of bacon, and things like that. And these detailed descriptions, very specific descriptions, are effective feedback. Effective feedback is not when you get carbonara which is not good and then you say, this is not very tasty carbonara, you should try and make it better next time. So this is not effective feedback. This is lost opportunity, because effective feedback has to be actionable. You have to tell them exactly how to improve, what success looks like. So, for example, show a picture, show a task, produce a sentence, show or prepare good carbonara first time before you try to cook together, and explain that, you know, your carbonara, for example, is very good, but it can be a little bit improved. So bear in mind in terms of self-esteem that success, as we all know, is not 100% correct test. But the very fact of trying and entering kitchen, you know, and engaging in the activity, participating and thinking how they can do it better is what creates positive mindset and what helps them to really do whatever they're doing better next time. So we should concentrate on their ability to succeed. And of course, feedback is very often better if it's not accompanied by scores. Even if you have to provide feedback after a summative assessment, it's better to provide feedback first and then grades, because they concentrate better and they think more, in fact, about the whole thing. Now, types of feedback. I don't know how many of you are members of školska knjiga of Engleski u srednjoj školi Facebook group, but today one of our colleagues really posted a wonderful and extremely funny video on corrective feedback. So please take a look if you're in the group. So most common type of feedback, luckily or unluckily, is corrective feedback, which focuses on errors. Now, some say that it can promote learning. Some say that it doesn't help learning. Research is not completely sure whether that's correct or not. So some are for and some are against. What research can really tell us that content and accuracy are equally important, and the best results for feedback are when we give feedback on both of these elements at the same time, because we know that we don't make sentences where we have content and then other sentences where we have grammar. So these things are intertwined. Also, as teachers, we have to decide which errors we correct. Of course, big, global, frequent, and stigmatizing are definitely something that should be corrected. Small errors, yes, or local errors, but maybe not that much. Formality is something definitely to be corrected, but those things that you feel that students can self-correct or are something they have recently studied is something that we still have to give them space for. So not correct everything in these terms. Then there is a question of direct feedback, which is more common, I guess that you would agree, with lower level students. But then there is direct and indirect, which we will see in the table. Before we see it, can I get your comment on indirect feedback and direct? Which one you prefer? Or let's start with indirect. When would you give indirect feedback? Which means a little bit later on, postponed, let's say. Can you share in the chat, please, your views? Delayed feedback. What would be advantage of delayed feedback, the one that you give later, compared to immediate, so where you immediately in the course of events correct the student? So there are benefits, definitely, of delayed feedback. Nobody's interrupting. You can reflect more. Of course, both sides can reflect. Excellent. Thank you, Dina. Very, very important. It's very important when we ask these questions that I was referring to earlier. You know, when you ask about irregular verb, you can give 3 seconds for them to give immediate response. But if you have more, if you want deeper understanding, then you have to provide more time, and this is the case. When I want students to discover something for themselves first. Yes, that's very, very useful, especially when it comes to more complex tasks like those that we've touched upon when it comes to matura or writing skills, which are more complex. Of course, give them some time. Immediate, some students want immediate feedback. some of my students, even adults, said, "Teacher, can you please correct me for everything that I do wrong?" And I was like, Jesus, well, of course I will. Of course not. I will have to interrupt the whole conversation. But it is art and not science of a teacher to judge and determine when to use what type. Indirect, yes, from Maya, please. Essays writing, right, with public speaking presentations. Okay, so something that they will profit from immediately in that case, or something that you need more thinking about. So here you have examples of role play and writing a narrative, and things that we can give feedback on in these two cases, for example. What is basically important is that if we're going to give feedback on role play, for example, that you give students questions like these. It doesn't matter that it doesn't mean that it has to be every time before the activity. It can be in the beginning of school year or beginning of semester, so you raise awareness again, and that they think about this as they produce language or as they write something, in the second case of writing a narrative. And when you give feedback, if you say that I'm going to give feedback on organization, then don't give on pronunciation at that point. So they know what to focus on. Of course, at certain points, we will have to give both at the same time. But in that case, you can say, okay, you're writing a narrative or story, so I will be looking at things 1, 2, and 3. So please bear that in mind as you are writing. So these are some of the examples. Also for indirect, direct, it's a question of time also, not only of mistakes, unfortunately. In indirect, for spoken language, you can say you don't understand, or very, very common is using rising intonation and your eyebrows, of course. And then direct, where you give short explanation on errors that need to be corrected and you provide correct form. I guess you would retreat to this if it's very important or lower level or more common mistake. Also in writing, there can be a mark in the margin. So that would be indirect technique. But also direct correction is provided, accompanied by a brief explanation of why the correction is needed. Again, depends on the type of mistake and the time that you have and the level of your student, but just these are the things that you can use and I think are very useful. Now, when I was preparing this presentation, my daughter asked me what I was going to talk about, and I said that feedback was one of the topics and that we're going to discuss peer feedback as well. And she said, "Oh, Mom, you know, we only do this in English, and I know we should do it in other subjects." So it's just another proof that we're a bunch of people who really try hard to put everything in practice that we learn. I'm really proud of being an English teacher for that. Now, peer feedback is becoming, I think, more popular with years. It definitely benefits both sides. So giver and receiver, both students, if we're talking about some kind of pair work. It fosters independence because they are on their own. They listen better, they pay more attention to content. Of course, we as teachers have to provide a model, and sometimes research says that some students don't take peer feedback as something serious, but would prefer to have teachers' feedback in the end. So if you feel in certain cases that this is a case in your classroom, don't hesitate to give some follow-up, you know, in the end of peer feedback, for example, as a comment. My personal experience is that collaborative writing is really one of the best ways to do peer feedback, and it's supported by research findings that in case of collaborative writing, students produce better content with less mistakes and are less afraid of being offended during receiving feedback and offending their fellow student while giving feedback. And this is why I mentioned earlier a relationship in the class. So feedback, no matter who gives it to whom and how, is based on the teacher who believes in feedback. And if the teacher doesn't believe in feedback, and if the relationship and the social context in classroom is not good, then all feedback is going to be troubled, especially peer feedback. Now, regarding feedback on writing, something I mentioned earlier, so here is the link. Most students don't mind repeating some spoken utterances, which you correct. But when you talk about repeating written tasks, and I don't know if any of us could raise hands and say, yes, my students like that. I would be very surprised. Please prove me wrong. So these are some of the things that can be solved by using application like this. You can also, so there are ready-made topics that students can use and write their essays or paragraphs, and they get automated quite good, I have to say, though it is artificial intelligence, but quite good comments and feedback. But you as a teacher can also set your task by creating workbook. There you just have to register, but it's still free. Another thing is Gradebook, which we have through Cambridge LMS, for those of you who are using it. Very good feedback on the tests that we have. So if this situation, as I said, is favorable, and if the relationship is good, then it's more likely that we are getting feedback in the way that we would really like to. Of course, giving personalized feedback on writing is extremely difficult and time-consuming, and can be perhaps done in particular cases if necessary, but I'm quite aware how difficult it is. So just to sum up on feedback, so fewer errors, please. So let them make some errors, not, of course, not all of them, but vary kind of feedback that you give, vary the focus, encourage peer and self-evaluation if possible, and make it specific to different learning tasks. So these are some of the things that you can take a look, and don't be afraid to discuss feedback with your students, because this is another skill. It's a life skill of giving feedback and collaboration. It's more important than some of the tenses that we use, perhaps. It's motivation, it's confidence, and it helps in developing all sorts of skills, and of course self-esteem later on. Now, criteria, someone said rubrics are very good tool. Yes, I would definitely agree that they are good, and I have two examples here. On A2 level, there is a photo, and students, a task, speaking task is describing a picture. So if you don't have these three lines, you can expect something like, okay, there is a green tent, there are a lot of people standing and talking, and there are very tall buildings behind this fair. Okay, and it's a description of a picture. But if we want success criteria that focuses on certain items that we wanted to teach and then assess, then we should use something like this. So provide success criteria, describe where people are, use 3 to 7 prepositions, what clothes people are wearing, and use certain number of verbs, for example, in present continuous in this case. And then you get a completely different speaking result, of course. And it is A2 level. Now for B2 level, I have an example from Ljestvica za bodovanje pisanog teksta na višoj razini, and all of you who have 4th class students, I'm quite sure that you've seen this, published as guidance for this year's Matura. And this is an example of criteria for the student who gets 5 points, which is a maximum number of points for the essay. And now what will happen on your mock test, Matura, is that some people are unfortunately not going to get 5 points on this. And this is an example of this criteria. So number of points is 2. And I would like you in the chat to share with us, how would you give action feedback to your student who scored 2 points? For example, in the area of coherence and cohesion. So it says, često je nejasan tijek misli, ograničeno je strukturiranje odlomaka, ograničena je upotreba kohezivnih sredstava. So your student says, why did I get 2 points here? And if you give them these 3 sentences, they're not going to help. So can you make 1 or 2 sentences regarding cohesion and coherence that could be considered actionable feedback, something your students can start with, use as advice for next time writing better essay in these terms? Or if you have an idea about vocabulary or grammar, feel free. We just want some examples in the chat of actionable feedback, because these are very, very formal sentences to be given to a student. Use linking words and phrases. Thank you very much. No linking words, like firstly, secondly. There are no paragraphs. So you have to put your essay, organize it into paragraphs. Make sure to give examples to the arguments, and then you could perhaps add a sample of an argument. No topic sentence. Okay. And tell that to the student. So provide very, very specific, very specific instructions they can work on. So don't say just make new carbonara, but say, you know, your water really needs to be boiling because your spaghetti are going to stick together and you have to mix them. So stuff like that. Concluding linkers, present, topic, sentence, etc. Okay, yes, thank you very much. These are very, very operational feedback sentences, very action feedback sentences. Okay, now this topic of mediation appeared in 2018 in Common European Framework. What it means is how we use 4 skills and how we integrate them. For those of you who are lovers of TED Talks, and I am definitely, you know, a huge supporter of using TED in classroom, I hope that you've seen The Gift of Life and Death by Emily Levine. If not, I strongly encourage you to take a look as an advice of an older and wise woman to us who are a bit younger, and then from us to those who are a lot younger than we are. Which is also, in a way, an example of mediation of meaning and context and concepts of life and death in her case. But this sentence of hers, reality comes into being through an interaction, is in fact what mediation is about. So if you want to simplify it very much, you adjust the message for the recipient by retelling, translating, or simplifying. It's not something that we add to the 4th skill. So in these terms, it's not something that is separate. It's not a title like today we're doing present perfect. You can't say today we're doing mediation. I mean, you could, but it would not be quite clear because mediation is so much intertwined with everything that we do in the class. So what we do in the class, how we talk with our students, that's mediation. We mediate between content and people through second language. And we adjust these messages and content for our recipients. So we are true examples of mediators. It doesn't have to be necessarily foreigners. It doesn't have to be a dispute, but it is, it's also part of mediation. So what can be mediated? Communication, concepts, text, and strategies. And it sounds really formal when you read it like this, facilitating pluricultural space and facilitating collaborative interaction with peers and so on. But if you take a closer look, managing interaction, linking to previous knowledge, adapting language, expressing a personal response, listening, note-taking, translating, explaining data. This is something that definitely I hope we can all agree that something that we really do. I would say almost every day in our classroom. Now, this is a first activity that I have prepared for you today, which is, let's say, more typical mediation activity. And I've prepared 2 brochures, not really prepared, found for you, nature parks and national parks of Croatia. So you have brochure available on the link in both Croatian and in English. And as you can see, there is a text, there are some facts, numbers, sports, interesting data, and your students will be working in pairs as a student A and B. What they will be doing in terms of mediation are the things in the yellow on the right. So facilitating pluricultural space, relaying specific information, explaining data, streamlining the text, translating, linking to previous knowledge, and providing personal response. And I have a worksheet for you available already. So you have context, you have pre-mediation revision of structures that will be useful in this activity, then instructions for the practice and time frame, student A and B roles, and structures they will be using in this mediation practice, but also useful in other mediation practice. And there is a third side to this worksheet, which provides space for notes. Now, note-taking is, as you could see just on previous slide, is one of the skills that belongs to mediation. Now, one person will be taking notes while reading, and that's mediator, and the other, foreign visitor, student A, will be taking notes while listening. And then all of you together can do group feedback on this activity, individual feedback. You can identify strategies that they needed to use, and in the end, they could individually select some of the vocabulary or phrases that they find useful here. This is a great opportunity, I think, because you can add this activity into different topics and in different kinds of schools and programs, to environment, to friends, to traveling, nature, sports, free time, tourism, whatever you want. A second one is 4-page material for you on topic of courage, very neatly prepared, can cover, I think, double lesson definitely, if you use the whole of it, and it's very also critical thinking oriented, but you can add more mediation practice to it in terms of mediating concepts, note-taking, personal response, collaborating to construct meaning, and other mediation strategies. If you additionally use pair and group work for 2 texts. One text you have here on the screen, the other is a longer full-page text, so which is not very easy to use, just like reading, and not very interesting in the classroom. So for this one student will have to mediate meaning of certain concepts to another student, because text is not very easy and it cannot be repeated as it is written. So it has to be reformulated and simplified, streamlined. Another activity is down here in the bottom on the right, is that you can, for the second longer article, you can divide your class into groups of 5, and each of members of the group can read about one type of courage that is mentioned in the article, find the definition, examples, and some personal response to this type or their own example. And that is something how they can do this. So as you can see, mediation is intertwined with different sorts of activities in any kind of course book. And here we have some more examples from Cambridge Empower C1, because in order to cover these mediation strategies in the interaction, we have to first, I think, teach strategies of communication and raise awareness of communication. I think that you would all agree with me that most of the problems in the world are based on miscommunication. Whether our purpose or not is a political issue, it doesn't matter. But luckily, most of these things can be solved through good communication. So on the left, you have example of ideas about communication where they just raise awareness about it. And then one of the samples of communication where you have to communicate in delicate situations or disputes is definitely negotiating. And then, though our students are very good at pronunciation, but intonation in implied questions is something that can be practiced here. And as you can see, you have some listening here as well. It's short listening, just very short tasks, which I have provided on the link for you as well. And then speaking activity, where they have to negotiate in pairs and use some of these phrases. And I think it's very, very good because they're these are the phrases used in real life. You will see yourself. Also, being tactful, informal discussions. This is also something that's very common in mediation, where the people act as intermediaries, facilitate communication in delicate situations or disputes, and very, very common in all sorts of teams and companies and staff rooms, if you want, managing interaction. So these are some of the examples where they have also short listening, and they have to work with their pair in the interaction by being tactful. And that's definitely something an intermediary has to do, really. And this brings us, so as I said, on the link you will find all these worksheets and listening and exercises and teacher's notes. So this brings us to the end of today's webinar, where first I would like to thank you, and then remind you that we started with the Museum of Broken Relationships. And it's not because we are in a broken relationship, it's just because I selected this museum. I mean, the Museum of Hangovers is right around the corner here, but Museum of Broken Relationships as a place where we don't want to be. So we want to foster good relationships in our staff rooms, in our classrooms, and in the future workplace, because collaboration, I think, is the most important skill with all those interesting shades of communication skills that we practice and teach our students. And I would like all of us to foster these good relationships. So thank you once again for being on this journey today with me, because it's the journey that matters, and who you travel with. So thank you for traveling with us. If there is anything else that you have ideas or need, and you would like us here, the editors in Školska, to prepare for you, please, on the next slide is my contact, is a link, or if you prefer, you can use a QR code to get a link to the resources. The recording will be available in a couple of days on our YouTube channel for those people who were not able to be with us this evening, or if you want to go back through something again. I hope there was something useful you found, at least some worksheets that you will be able to use in your classrooms. And thank you all, and goodbye. I hope for those of you who I'm not going to see before Christmas and New Year, have lovely holidays, and we all deserve them, and be ready for the next new year, which is, I'm quite sure, be challenging again. And thank you all.